tilting at windmills. An online stranger doesn't know you. All they have are a few vague impressions of you, too meager to form anything but a phantasm. So, when they attack you, they're really just attacking their own imagination, and there is no need to take it personally.
Yeah. I mean, when I first joined social media, started tweeting in 2016, I used to get quite upset when I used to get like nasty comments and stuff, like people would say stuff and, I would believe it in a way. I'd be like, like they'd say stuff about me and they'd call me like, sometimes I'd just be called a dumb shit or whatever. Sometimes people would say that I was a pseudo intellectual or whatever. And back then, I used to sort of think, oh, okay, I must have said something that was wrong, for them to think that. And then I realized after a while, hang on a second, I don't know anybody who I engage with online. I don't actually know any of them. I don't even have an idea of who they are, really. But I've convinced myself that I know who they are. So therefore, I mean, the same must be happening to other people doing that to me. They couldn't possibly know who I really am. They've only seen one or two of my posts, and then they've built up a personality profile of me based on those two posts. And I mean, we barely know people that we know in real life. You can live with someone for 5 years and still not really understand who they are. And yet we seem to think that, we can read one post by someone or, watch one video by that person. And immediately we think that we know that person. And this is a very powerful illusion that influences, I think, almost in fact, I would say that everybody is afflicted by this delusion, where we just get a tiny snippet of a person's words or their actions, just a tiny snippet. And from that, we just build this massive fictional character in our heads. From that skeleton, I mean, I think I did tweet something along the lines of that. I'll read it out to you. This was a tweet I recently sent, actually. So I'll read it. So it says, you are a different character in the mind of each person who knows you, because their impression of you is made of the bones of what they've seen, fleshed out by a musculature of pure imagination. And I think that really sums up what we do when we see people online, where, we just have this bare bones based on a very brief interaction with someone. And then from that, we create this whole fictional character who is very real in our minds, but doesn't actually exist outside of our own heads. And that is the person that we level our criticism at. That is a person that we level our praise at. And that is a person that will defend or attack in arguments and, will develop all these theories about this person who doesn't actually exist. And that happens all of the time. And it happens, I realized it was happening to me. People were doing that to me. They would say things about me that just wasn't true. Like, for instance, if I wrote a tweet that criticized the left, people would say that I was right wing, but I'm not right wing at all. In fact, I'd say that, I don't really have strong political opinions, but I'm probably a centrist overall, generally. I find that, I agree with some of the left, I agree with some of the right things and just merge them together. But left wingers, when I criticize the left, people assume that I'm like some far right guy, and they'll be like, they'll write, oh, you're a crypto fascist. And then if I criticize the right, then if I criticize the right, then people say I'm a globalist, libtard, all this stuff like, I'm a WEF shill or whatever.
The terms are so good. There's never been a better time to insult someone than right now.
Exactly. And I'm just there, like, before this would have really upset me, I would have been like, just from the fact that it was just because I wasn't used to it. I wasn't used to receiving all this hate. But now when I read it, I actually read it with a smile on my face. I'm just like, because I know that this person is not actually attacking me. They're attacking their own imagination.
Yes. Well, here's maybe a couple of interesting considerations to add in there. This is one of the reasons why audience capture is so dangerous, because the only way that someone can genuinely tilt at windmills is if they have an erroneous view of who you are really compared with what they've seen of you online. But if your entire persona has subsumed the person and you are playing a role on the internet, quite rightly, they're pointing at the person that you are on the internet. And what you've done is you've basically become cucked by your own audience. You're now this marionette that's being played by the algorithm. to the point where you do whatever it asks of you. You feed red meat to the mob. So when someone does point the finger and say you're a globalist shill, or you're a woke libtard, or you're a right-wing racist, or whatever, when someone does say that, where is the firm place for you to stand? Where have you got that you can actually stand if you have sold your soul in order to gain notoriety online, and your integrity is something that you can't buy back no matter how much you try and pay for it? If you've done that, where is you can't grin when people criticize you, because they're criticizing the contrived monster that you made, that you created yourself into.
Absolutely. And it's a self-reinforcing feedback loop as well, because like if you're someone like, say, let's use an example. Let's use someone like Tim Pool, for instance. Tim Pool was originally sort of like a kind of anti. He was an Occupy Wall Street guy, and he was sort of, I'd say, he was quite progressive. He's quite left, and he began to sort of flirt with some right-leaning ideas, and he developed a right-wing audience. And over time, the people on the left who were formerly followers of his, they began to attack him, saying, "Oh, you're a right-wing shill now. You're racist, sexist, transphobe, blah blah blah." And so they were attacking this. And what happened was that Tim began to take this time. At least this is what it appears like to me. I don't know him personally, but this is what it seems like to me. He seems to have taken that to heart, and he became gradually more and more right wing. So, I mean, I would say he's probably on the right now. I don't know if he would agree with that, but based on what I know of his content, he seems to be pretty firmly conservative. Although he calls himself a liberal, his opinions don't gel with his self perception. So I think he's a pretty good idea of somebody who's succumbed to audience capture. He might still think he's a liberal, but all of his guests pretty much are people on the right, or at best at the centre. He doesn't engage with left people very often. The only time that I really remember him doing that in recent history was with Vijaya Gadde on the Joe Rogan podcast. But generally, he seems to be pretty firmly on the right. He's got his friends are people like the Quartering, who are also sort of somewhat, they call themselves liberal, but they're really more slightly to the right. And I think what's happened is when left people call people like Tim Pool out, what happens is this makes him even more audience captured, because he then says, I'm a centrist. How can you call me right wing? How can you call me a racist? I'm a centrist. And then he'll say, oh, no, it's not me who's moved. It's you who've moved. You have gone crazier, not me. And so he'll go even further to the right and say, these people are absolutely crazy. They're accusing me of being racist. And, so it's like a self-perpetuating cycle. And then he becomes a bit more right wing. So then the left attack him even more, saying, oh, you're a racist. So it just keeps going on and on and on. And, it happens, I think, across the spectrum. That's just one example. I mean, there are probably people who have done this, who've moved leftwards, and, they've been attacked by people on the right due to that. And then they've gone even more to the left as a result of that. And so, yeah, it's a mutual sort of cycle, symbiosis.
There's another one that I think relates to what we've just spoken about, which is the principle of humanity. Every single person is exactly what you would be if you were them. This includes your political opponents. So instead of dismissing them as evil or stupid, maybe seek to understand the circumstances that led them to their conclusions.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is part of why Rogerian rhetoric is so valuable, because we don't really have a good idea of anybody that we meet only online. There are people that I've got relationships with online who I feel like I know well, but I don't. I just don't, because all I've seen is what they've chosen to show me. And when all you've seen is what people have chosen to show you, there are selection effects to that, and you develop a very distorted idea of who they are. And this causes you to have assumptions about people, and it can, just cause you to have completely skewed reality. And I think so. If you really want to understand who somebody really is, a much better strategy is to try to look at how they became who they were, put yourself in their shoes, and to reflect on their own internal logic, the internal logic of their own actions, to try to understand. Because you've got to bear in mind that everybody does things that they think are right for them. Everybody, like every action that somebody takes, they take because they think it's the right thing to do. even if it's the wrong thing to do, they think it's the right thing to do, which is why they do it. So if you can use that assumption to try to reverse engineer a person's life experience and find out why they did the things that they did, then you can develop a much more deeper understanding than if you simply look at what they've said online and what they've done online and, what's been said about them or written about them. These are all going to be things that are sort of subject to selection effects. People are always going to comment on the most extraordinary and most wildest things that people have done. They're not going to comment on the more mundane things that people do in their lives. For every crazy cancelable thought that a person has, they have 1,000 opinions that are just run of the mill and mundane.
Yep.
But what happens is that if somebody says one thing that you don't like, you'll basically just regard that one thought in that entire galaxy of thoughts that is their mind, and you'll just you use that one little thought to just sort of judge them and to dismiss them or to fall in love with them or whatever.
Yes.
And so it's much more important to have a full holistic understanding of a person's life, because what they show online is nothing. It's the tip of the iceberg. You can't see that massive iceberg that is all of the things that are motivating them behind the scenes, offline, in their life.
What's happening, people? If you enjoyed that, then press here for the full unedited episode. And don't forget to subscribe. Peace.